Hi, Patrick from OntarioBeerKegs. This video is not scripted, so it might go all over the place. Excuse me for that. We get asked about regulators on a daily basis as one of our most common questions, and we're just going to explain to you why we use Taprite regulators. There's basically 3 American companies that use the UL 252 standard, which means the regulators are rated and are approved to take that high pressure down to low pressure. The gauges are also UL 252A approved, which means they are calibrated when they're manufactured. They do work and they're not no name. There's basically 3 American companies that make them like this. There's Taprite, there's Micromatic, which do not sell to wholesalers, so it makes it very difficult to get into the mainstream. And there's Perlick, which doesn't have much of a market share. So Taprite is pretty much the premier name that you see for regulators. If your regulator is not UL 252 approved or it does not have a brand name, just throw it out because it's going to cause problems. We've had a lot of that here. Now this one here is a T752 series, I believe, and it looks like it's 0 to 60 and 0 to 2000. With this body here, with the plastic bonnet and the popular dial, which are stiff at first, you have to remove the red knob to adjust the pressure up and down on your low pressure gauge. If your low pressure gauge is 0 to 60, it typically has a working PSI of 0 to 50. And this one's very common for beer, and we really should use 0 to 30, so I don't know why 0 to 60 is the most common. The high pressure gauge is useless. I would just put a piece of duct tape on it and ignore it. Your CO2 tank, when you have it filled, is at room temperature is going to be somewhere around 700 to 800 psi. When you put it into the fridge, it's going to drop to 600 psi or so overnight, depending on how cold it is. That does not mean you have a leak. It just means the cold compressed the CO2 a little bit. Once this does drop down into the red zone, it's too late. Your CO2 tank is already on fumes. If you want to know how much CO2 you have, go weigh your tank, subtract the tare that's stamped on the side of the tank, and you'll figure it out by pounds. 1 pound of CO2 will dispense roughly 10 to 12 gallons depending on your usage if you want to benchmark for how to do your math. Another thing about Taprite regulators is your sides, your high pressure ports are always left hand thread 1/4 inch NPT. And I have one here. That is a safety mechanism. It does not want you to be able to put in right hand threads from other components and to get yourself into a situation where your regulator may fail. Your low pressure ports are always right hand thread. They're pretty much interchangeable, and again it's 1/4 inch NPT. The other things with Taprite regulators is they typically have an integrated O-ring, and if this fails or you need to replace it, you can just throw in a fiber or a Teflon. It's not too picky on what you put in there. You just need something to make the gasket. With the poly regulators, it's not just the knob that's plastic. It's the front half of the regulator, the polycarbonate. This one I probably won't be able. All right. So once we take this off, you'll be able to see there's not much to it. And that's all plastic. And this is why it's only rated for CO2. This can only handle 1800 psi. Yes, you get that wonderful locking mechanism. You don't need anything to adjust it, but you just downgraded the regulator by picking the plastic cap. So you can't change those around too easily. There's not much else to that. Whereas you get to the sink regulator, the entire front half of the body is sink. This is the same front half of the regulator they use for your nitrogen regulators. So we go from 1800 psi to 3000 psi on your high pressure side. This one does not have the poly adjustment, but it's just got a simple lock and nut, back to lock and nut off. If you're strong enough, you can just move it in by hand. If If you're not strong enough, grab yourself a key, a dime, a bottle cap, a screwdriver, anything you want. You can even Loctite yourself in a dime into there and it will make a handle. It's pretty easy to do. And that's pretty much it for the sink regulator. This one is a dual product, whereas your single product will get you one pressure. You'll be able to output it, that one pressure that you set it at, to as many different kegs as you want. Your dual product will allow you to pick two pressures. Each separate line will have that constant pressure, and you can split that with a manifold to as many different ways as you want. So most people, if you're just doing your ales and your lagers and your pilsners, they're fine with the single body. If you want to play around with some stouts and other type of things, or some soda water, you may want two different pressures. When you get your regulator, we use the MFL threaded 1/4 inch MFL. It attaches to our swivel nuts. Do not throw your box out until you locate the flare washer. The flare washer will go between that swivel nut and the regulator. One of the next biggest questions we always get with these regulators is, I want to take my regulator that's single pressure and I want to make it a two product regulator. How do I do that? Can I buy a secondary and connect it? No, you cannot add a secondary to a primary. This is not rated on the high pressure side. Secondary regulators are right hand thread. This is part of that safety mechanism. This stops you from taking a high pressure regulator and trying to put it through a bonnet that is not rated for the high pressure. If you want to take a primary and add regulator bodies, you need to add primaries to it. To add a primary regulator to another regulator body, you remove the sides, and like I said, they're left-hand thread, so it's a little bit counterintuitive when you're doing it. And you would grab yourself a left-hand to left-hand nipple. You take your left-hand to left-hand nipple, and you can just screw them up as much as you want. When you're connecting it, remove any old material you may have on it. Take your time, get something to get all the threads off. Get inside the female port, make sure that you clear everything out, and just make sure it's all out. You can either use Teflon tape once you have it, use 6 to 7 rotations, because it's the tape that's going to make the seal, it's not the metal, and just give it a couple rotations till it's tight, and then you'll basically not much with a tool. If you overcrack it and you get it into the gasket down there, you can damage the housing or cause it to widen and other damage. The way we like to do it here is with Loctite. And we'll take the Loctite, left hand. So you'll put it in, you'll see about where it stands. It's the blue Loctite semi-permanent. So I know where this is going to sit in the regulator, so I'm just going to do a quick little bead around it where it's going to sit. It's just a couple of drops. And then that blue Loctite has made the seal without getting Loctite into the regulator body. And I have this wonderful bead all the way around where it's going to seal. In about an hour that's going to dry, and that's going to be leak free every time without having to double check it. You still double check it, but you're not going to have any issues. And that's pretty much all there is to doing that. Thank you.